Welcome to episode 399 of the Running Rogue podcast. This is your host, Chris McClung, joined by James Dodds. Excited to be back with you. We just went through the phases of training, the 5 phases of training. Now we're going to get into some of the finer points of how you construct those phases. So we've got a series of chapters on kind of breaking down some of the mechanics of that macro cycle planning around the periods. So we'll get into that here in a second. Today we're going to be talking about the down week, kind of giving you an anatomy of the down week, which is chapter 14 in the book, episode 399 today. The all-important down week, we'll get into that in a second. You said you had a couple of opener options. So what do we want to chat about to kick it off?
Well, one is short and brief, so super simple, and then I'll save the meaty one for next. But one was any ideas for episode 400? I think we baited the audience last week.
I haven't seen anything come across, but I've been thinking about it myself, so have some ideas that we should chat about. I definitely think we need to step away from our little step through the book to do something unique for episode 400, which will be next week, which is pretty exciting. Mm-hmm. So I've got some ideas we should talk about offline.
Okay, I love that.
But if any listeners has ideas, feel free to lob them into our Instagram or YouTube comments.
I love that. Well, the big one is freaking Boston. You were just there. Tell us about it.
Freaking Boston. Yeah, I came back yesterday, got back yesterday evening. It was awesome. I mean, Boston's always awesome. It's, it's my favorite running trip of the year. Every year I've been there, I think every year since 2017, I think, other than 2020, of course. So yeah, it's my annual tradition, and I just absolutely love going there to experience all of the festivities that are Boston, plus, most importantly, support our rogue community that's racing there, many of whom were doing their first Bostons, which is always a special thing to celebrate with them after a lot of hard-earned attempts at getting there. A few that I'm thinking about were athletes that had qualified multiple times but didn't get in because of the buffer, and then kept getting faster qualifiers in order to finally get here, and here they were. So that was awesome. Plus, obviously, soaking in all the other festivities is always amazing. Boston, the event is different in a sense from other majors because it feels very compact, the experience. If you're in New York or Chicago for those majors, if you weren't paying attention, you could experience those cities without knowing a marathon was happening if you were just really, not paying attention. But I feel like in Boston, especially if you're in that back Bay area, it's just the energy's palpable. Everybody's living it in some capacity. And so it's a more compact experience, which means it just feels more pervasive, so to speak. And so you can't miss it. And of course, all the brands have heavily invested in making it a fun weekend outside of just the Boston Marathon itself. So it's just epic. And it's, it doesn't have to be your goal if you're listening. If it's not, that's okay. But if it is your goal, it is a worthy one, in my opinion. And a lot of that just comes down to the whole weekend. It's not just the race, but the whole weekend. Mm-hmm. So it was awesome.
That's cool.
And of course the weather was amazing. So that helps, best weather in 15 years. I think since 2011, we hadn't had a cold day that had a tailwind like Monday. So it was definitely a day where the times were there for the taking. I saw a stat yesterday that 3,000 more people than last year requalified for Boston at Boston.
Wow.
So a big jump in terms of requalifiers just because of the weather.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that shows in the world, or the course record being set. So
course record, on the men's side being set 201 and change, breaking the 2011 prior course record, which was 203 and change. The women didn't get the course record, but weren't far off of it. Sharon Lochetti got that last year in 217 and change. This year she was 218 and change. But a lot of that came to, they were just a little bit, not conservative, necessarily, but a little more conservative in the first half than the men. The men kind of went off from the gun and had a few players pushing the pace from the front kind of throughout that first half, which meant they went through a little faster pace. They were through the half on course record pace or a little faster than course record pace. And then career closed on that, even in the final 5 miles after heartbreak. And the women, I think, ran 2:11 for the first half, pretty much flat, 2:11 flat. And then Lochetti ran a 3-minute negative split to get the 2:18. So it was just a different race. I mean, they were moving well too, but it wasn't quite course record pace. If they'd gone out in course record pace for half, I think it would have gone down on that side too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I thought it was cool that she got back to back because the weekend before Rory wins the Masters and you had back to back Masters.
Yeah.
And then on the women's side over here in Boston, you have back to back.
Well, the men's too. John Career won last year as well.
Did he
so yeah, repeat champions on both sides.
Holy cow.
Lochetti was just super impressive. You know, she measured herself well in the first half, really into Newton, well into Newton. She would just stayed out of sight mostly. You're kind of like, where's Lochetti? You kind of had to find her because she was tucked in behind, which is how you want to be for most of Boston. And then when she went, it was over. And you could just tell she had this like assassin's look on her face, just totally all business
just
when it
total,
came when it came down to it. And it was obvious when she made the move based on how she looked and the focus she had on her face that nobody was coming back.
Yeah.
So it was awesome. Also, obviously great American results as well. American records on both sides in terms of Boston course records for Americans. So that was cool to see too. A lot of depth out there for us, for the Americans as well.
Yeah.
And our runners ran well. All right. I got to see a lot of them at our post party at the Liberty and a lot of happy folks. I know there were a handful that didn't get what they wanted, but which always happens. Boston is tough, even if the weather's good and you don't always nail it. But yeah, so a little bit of a few people were frustrated, I know, or disappointed, but a lot of happy faces at the post party, which was good.
That's awesome. You might have just answered the last question I had, and that it was just going to be, was there any like unique theme, like every year Boston special, but in its own way? But perhaps that's it. Back-to-back winners.
Back-to-back winners. Yeah, the day was there for the taking. My talk on Sunday was all about how do you seize the day when you have this type of opportunity, and how do you stay measured in that? Because I think there was this kind of idea in your head that you start thinking about, well, I got to go take it, but I don't think you really take from Boston. You kind of receive from it. So even with the good conditions, I was still making sure that people had the mindset to be measured about their results or their performance and their execution so that they could save it for when it matters after you get over heartbreak.
Yeah. Well, obviously effective. There were a lot of PRs. So.
A lot of good days. And so, yeah, but it was awesome. I was cheering out there at mile 25, which I've cheered in a bunch of places, kind of found my spot now, I think. I've been there the last couple of years. It's only a mile from the finish. But unless you have, and I've been at the finish because I was able to get VIP access one year. So I've been at the finish line. I've been in a bunch of different spots. But I liked the spot I found in mile 25 because I can run there. Usually if I'm staying near the finish, it's about 1.5 miles. And then you can actually get, if you know what you're doing, you can get on the rail, right before the mile 25 sign, right before the sit go sign. And you can, see and actually feel like you're engaging with people racing versus if you're in certain spots, you might be 3 or 4 rows deep, So
I've been in a 5th row deep.
Yeah, it can be chaotic, right? If you're in one of the crazier spots. And so I found this spot where you can definitely guarantee you're going to get on the rail and it's not too far from the finish. So, you can always run back too. So anyway, so I was there, got to see a lot of folks. It's funny because everybody, I'm looking for them. They're looking for me sometimes. Even if you see them, you're yelling their names, they can't hear you because of all the noise. So I don't think I saw, some people saw me, some people didn't. I saw a lot of people, but oftentimes they didn't see me because of the crowds. But I did see a handful. Got to see Parker. He saw me. Matt from Team Rogue Virtual gave me a high five. He was the only one that was present enough to be like, "Oh, I see you." Came over, gave me a high five. So anyway, it was awesome. It's just so much energy. I enjoy cheering it as much as I've enjoyed running it in the 4 times I've gotten to run it. So
that's really cool.
Anyway.
And I love that you brought up Matt. Just FYI, he had an ankle surgery that he timed so that he could recover and then start the build for Boston. And we were telling him be conservative, but he put in it, and he was smart, or he was wise. But got in all his miles, his workouts, his qualities, ran it in 3:02. It's like, good on you, man. Like,
yes. Yeah, I saw his post on the boards this morning or yesterday late, but yeah, he had a good day. 3:02. Kathy had some athletes crush it. 2:38, I think, was our fastest rogue out there. Andrew from Team Rogue here in Austin, and then we had the whole spectrum. But it was awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, thanks for entertaining that.
Yeah, of course.
I'm sure
I love
the people wanted to know
could probably be its own episode. Love the Boston weekend. I always come back just exhausted, because you're giving a lot to it, and it feels, it just feels like I'm giving a lot of my energy, but in the best ways, it's like, of course I want to give that. And so, but when I come back, I'm like, okay, the introvert in me needs to crawl in a hole for a week to recover, but it was awesome. So yeah, a little bit tired today, but we're holding strong. All right. So today we're going to talk about down weeks, and we've talked about this, I think, here and there in the context of our discussions on the periods of training. And I think our philosophy or methodology, I should say, around down weeks is, I think, a little bit unique to our programming, in the sense that the cadence that we use for it and the methods and our thought process around down weeks. Not that other people don't have down weeks, they do, but I think we've done a good job through the years of really codifying what they look like, how they fit, what the cadence of them is in the context of our training, what the workouts look like in the context of a down week. And so it's unique, but it's important. And so we're going to start with just some background on why and why down weeks. What is down week? Why do we do them? And then we'll talk about the success factors. We've got six success factors for having effective down weeks. They're going to help you make sure that they're effective. And, whether we go through the what or the why first, I actually think we should start with the why a little bit, and then we can talk about the what. But I guess, some of this will be a little bit mixed, but essentially a down week is just pulling back a little bit in the context of your training so that you can consolidate the gains from your up weeks. And you've articulated this well before, in a sense that there's this rhythm to training. And as I've said before, you build fitness in recovery. You don't build fitness while doing the work. You tear yourself down while doing the work. You build fitness in recovery. And there's different ways that recovery manifests in the context of our training methodology. Down weeks are one of them. But talk about that. I know you've given your speech before on that kind of rhythm and cadence of work, recover, and how it manifests in different ways, but remind us.
Yeah. And I don't even know what exact speech, I don't know what's about to come out, but I'll say what I'm thinking right now. Right. Like,
it's all in you. So
when I'm talking,
whatever comes out is good.
I hope. Well, when I talk to athletes about it, I very much use the word decompression. And I try to get them to look at things through the lens of stress. That's instead of like, we have all of this methodology and these explanations on how to build a proper program. And I think sometimes people can get lost in all of that. And it's like, wait, on one hand, I want to encourage the memorization of it, like learn the information. And then also sometimes you can back out and look at it a little bit higher level. And for the reasons you mentioned a second ago, when we're stressing the system, we're breaking down. And when we go to sleep or when we cover or we decompress, I like to use that word, The down week is an opportunity to decompress from all the rigor and stress that you're taking on. So I just like to encourage athletes to look at it through the lens of like coming out of the stress so that you might actually heal and recover. And again, for the reason you already said earlier, that we actually get faster in the recovery. The hard part, so the 2 up weeks where it's like the qualities are harder as well as the mileage growing during this week, we pull down volume. We'll still work turnover. There's still things that you can do during that week. But ultimately, it's like if you don't come out of that week feeling like you got a little bit of your pep in your step back, or if you come out of it still feeling that high stress load, then you're probably not utilizing the down week properly.
Right.
And it's there for that reason.
Yeah. And we think of it like it's a week-long version of a recovery run, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are the different ways that we recover to consolidate fitness in the context of our training? One is a recovery run. In our programming, typically that's at least 2 a week, 2 recovery runs a week, one after your quality workout, one after your long run, where you're running in order to create blood flow to promote healing so that you can consolidate the work of the speed workout or the long run. So that's one way. Another way is the down week, where we have these 2 up weeks where we're building volume and increased overall intensity. We have the down week so that we can then consolidate gains from those 2 up weeks. We have our taper, which is another way. We just talked about that last week. It's another way of consolidating fitness gains, but in the context of an entire training cycle, where we're taking 3 weeks for a marathon, 2 weeks for a half, 1 week for a speed track, and pulling back on volume and intensity so that you can recover fully and have fitness fully consolidated by the time you peak on your A race. Then we also have the post-race recovery period, which for a marathon is equal to the length of the taper, 3 weeks, where you're recovering from that peak, detraining in this case, rather than building your fitness so that you can then reset and start the cycle all over again. So those are all the ebb and flow, all the ways that we ebb and flow, and there may be some that I'm missing in the context of a training cycle, and it just depends on what period of time we're looking at to determine whether or not, it's a recovery day or recovery run, a down week or a recovery week of sorts, a recovery period like the taper, or a recovery period like the post-race recovery window. So those are all the ways we consolidate, but that ebb and flow of training is so important, because without it, you can't build fitness properly.
Mm-hmm.
Without it, you also could potentially risk burnout on a macro scale. And without it, you plateau over the long term, because you're not giving your body that ability to, on the biggest scale, recover from the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. So
the down week is just a little window into one of those recovery cycles. And so so then the question is, well, what is it? And I think there's perhaps maybe some things floating in people's heads when they hear that term. They think, oh, well, what does that mean? Am I skipping days? Am I, how am I pulling back? Is it a week where you don't run at all? Right? So okay. So what's the definition or mechanics of a down week? And we'll go into this more as we get through the episode, but in our world, it's every 3rd week.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a cycle throughout our training program. Any macro cycle looks the same, where you're building for 2 weeks and you're taking a down week for the 3rd week. So it's every 3rd week. You keep your routine. And again, we'll go into this more in a second, but you keep your routine, meaning you run all your normal days, but you pull back volume, typically 15 to 25%. Depending on the person and depending on their individual circumstances. You keep your speed. So we're still doing a speed workout. Again, we'll talk about that more in a second. But you still have a long run. You still have a medium long run. You still have a quality workout. You still have 2 recovery days, or potentially 3. And so it's basically a normal week. Mm-hmm. It's just the volume is reduced. Mm-hmm. And that's a way for you to consolidate the work from the up weeks
Still have strides
by having this cadence. Yes, of course, always strides. So it's basically looks like a normal week with just a little bit lower volume. Think of it almost like a mini taper week where you're just doing a little mini taper inside of an overall cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that can vary. It can ebb and flow as the season progresses. You know, we'll talk more about it. But one of the things I like to encourage people to do is to listen to their body during down weeks so that, if they're, they might have a prescribed cadence where they're cutting back 15%, but if their body's particularly beat up after an up week and they're like, you know what, I need a little bit more volume reduction, might on a given week go down 25% in order to feel a little bit better coming out of it. And so those are areas where you can flex, but it's basically a normal week with lower volume, if I were to summarize it in the simplest terms.
Yep.
So there you go. That is a down week. And then the question becomes, okay, well, how can I make the most of a down week? And so we're going to go into 6 success factors for a down week. Some of this being a little bit of a reiteration of what I've already said in the mechanics of it, but we'll kind of talk about the what and the why behind each of these success factors. So there's 6 of them. First one is that you should have a regular cadence to your down weeks, meaning, and this may vary for some people depending on the type of program they're in. We do it every 2 weeks, pretty much year round. You can set your clock on that. It's not every 2 weeks. Sorry, every 3 weeks year round. I mean, that's just our cadence, and we never really change it. I think if you were to get into an individual programming situation, maybe you would consider every 3rd week, maybe in exceptions to the rule. But it's a regular cadence, not an irregular cadence. You take your medicine, then you recover from your medicine. And so one of the questions that I sometimes get is why every 3 weeks or why every 3rd week do we take a down week? What is that cadence, and why 2 weeks before a down week? Why not 3 weeks before a down week?
Mm-hmm.
What do you say when somebody asks that?
I say that, yes, different programs exist. However, we know that in the way by which, this is where I'm glad you actually gave the sort of the like various ways by which to apply recovery, whether it be in the single session, in the week itself, in the 2 up, 1 down, or the 20 week plus the taper, or the post recovery. So when you understand that everything is interconnected, once you start recognizing that this is an entire formula building or recipe building upon itself, in the way that we have our the taxation of medium long runs set up, the taxation of the quality runs themselves set up, the taxation of the long runs themselves, the total mileage in the week, we have found in the way that we employ all of those variables, if we switched, at least in the group environment, more people get injured than not. So generally speaking, just from experiential understanding or just experience, period, we know that that's somewhat of a sweet spot. And because that works as a sweet spot, some might wonder, yeah, but I wonder if I could get away with 3 up, 1 down. Maybe, but you then need to think how every single quality pairs itself together across those 3 weeks. Because I think if that you take the rogue approach, and you take everything that we do with medium long runs, qualities, where we place the strides, where we place strength days, where we encourage recovery days, how much volume we put in the week itself, how long the long runs it is itself, and you string together 3 in a row without using our 2-1, don't be surprised if you break. So for us, we just know that it's like, yes, it can be debated. Theoretically, should one do it every 3-1 or 4-1, etc.? Sure, but how you place everything inside your 3 week up or your 4 week up, that now comes into question. So I'm like, how are you going to distribute stress through your 4 weeks on, 1 week down? Or how are you going to distribute stress in your 3 weeks on, 1 week down? We are very dialed in on how to serve up just enough stress to make you feel like you're towing that line, pull you down in that 3rd week and recover, and you're ready for 2 more weeks of stress. We have a tried and true practice there that we can hang our hat on and speak boldly and confidently about because we've seen it work time and time and time again. So honestly, the answer to that question is one of my favorite to deliver because I get to just bank it all on Rogue.
Yeah, we do it. We've done it this way. The other thing I think it enables, and to use a marathon example, I think it enables you to get in more 20-mile runs, frankly. Like we like to get for, a average experienced runner, we want them to do 5 to 6 20-mile runs, assuming they've built there properly, 5 to 6 20-mile runs in a marathon cycle. Now, if you're doing those back to back to back to back, that's going to be a problem. But if you're doing it 2 20-milers, then a down week, 2 20-milers, then a down week, where you're dropping your long run to 12 to 16 miles, depending on your experience level, then it makes it manageable versus if you're just cranking out 20-milers back to back to back to back. So it's not like we're not getting people to those higher mileage levels. It's just, in fact, I think the down week actually enables you to get them there in a way that's more sustainable. The other answer I like to give people, just because it connects to what is common practice, especially in the elite world, where people will talk about 10-day cycles. You'll hear elite coaches talk about, well, optimal is doing a 10-day cycle and not a weekly cycle. But for most everyday runners, we're structuring things around a weekly cadence because we have work and we have weekends and we have a life that is basically constructed in 1 week blocks and units. And so if I were to try to do a 10-day cycle, if I'm an everyday person, then that means I'm going to suddenly be doing some long runs on a Wednesday, which, for most of us isn't practical. And so if you say that that's optimal, potentially a 10-day cycle for an elite athlete who doesn't have that rigidity around a week long unit, then if you put 2 10-day cycles together, what does that mean? You have two long runs in 20 days, 2 big long runs in 20
See
days.
how you're coming at it
Versus in our structure where you have 2 big long runs in 21 days. And so it's essentially a way to construct a 10-day cycle approach in a 3-week window. So instead of 2 back-to-back 10-day cycles, you've got 3 1-week cycles, 21 days versus 20 days, but you're basically getting the same amount of equivalent work and you're just reordering it differently. So that's another example that I will use to kind of explain why I think it works. But I think your example or your reason, which is that, hey, it's just tried and true. We've been doing it for a long time. And by the way, we've been doing it for a long time for every level of athlete, front of the pack to back of the pack. So it's not like this is something where, oh, well, we're babying you. I think some people think it's too frequent. It's like, oh, no. Our most rigorously training, most experienced athletes are doing it this way as well.
Well, and your way of coming at it, I think, is brilliant because it'll show people, like, again, back to how you distribute stress. That nails it. That's a brilliant way to explain it because it's like, hey, if you look at the 21 versus 20-day cycle, and I have learned too sometimes things are so obvious that saying them with emphasis almost finally makes a light bulb go off. And it's just, I've said this before to athletes. I'm like, hey, we chose to live in 7-day cycles. And it makes people go, oh yeah. Like, cause we just know that there's 7 days in a week, but it's sort of like, well, that was determined at one point and we built our life around it. And then we created structures of 5 days at work and 2 days off. And I just think pulling them into that reminder of it's got to work with every dimension of who they are as a person also helps drive it home.
Yeah. So you have this regular cadence, and this cadence exists from really throughout the training block. Now, when we're in the base mode or priming mode, as we've talked about when we were talking about that phase of training, you might be building your volume. And in that case, you may not be dropping volume during the down week. You might be maintaining volume during the down week. So when you're ramping up, it's sometimes a situation where you're not necessarily going into a full down week mode until you get into the strength phase, that second phase of work. So that's where it might not be manifested completely. But one thing we do want to remind people of, and one thing we remind people of in our training blocks, is that we still call them down weeks in that phase of work, even if the volume isn't necessarily dropping. because we want you, just like we want you to create routine around your days of the week,
Mm-hmm.
we want you to create that mental routine around down weeks as well, so that it's at least a mental placeholder for, all right, this is my normal spot where I would have a down week. Maybe I'm not building volume, I'm maintaining it while I'm in that base phase. And maybe the workout will manipulate in that case versus the volume to sort of feel that down week stimulus, but it's more of creating that placeholder so that you have that cadence established already, and then it extends through the rest of the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So keep it a regular cadence. I do have occasionally some people say, well, I'll just listen to my body and figure out when I need a down week.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't recommend that approach because it then ends up with randomness,
Mm-hmm.
and two, I don't think all the time we know
Mm-hmm.
when we need it. The body's really adaptable at adding in work and normalizing that work. And so oftentimes I think we get to this place where like, I don't think I need a down week, or I don't need this. I don't need a recovery day. I could just go hammer another day. But more often than not, you do.
Mm-hmm.
And so just having it programmed for you, I think, prevents people from making those mistakes where they get ambitious.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say what you said before you brought up that rebuttal. I'm like, is key. It influences it. Like, it reminded me of, in the same way that we covered recently the race specific phase, and how those workouts and that going to the edge and everything signals to the body that you're going to peak. We can signal and establish that cadence, or that this is part of a circadian rhythm. We almost establish that rhythm and signal to our body, this is how it's going to be. And then that carries forward.
Yep. So have a regular cadence, program it in, and just live by it, just like you live by, or we want you to live by, having a routine with the days of the week. So that's success factor number 1, is have a regular cadence. Success factor number 2 is reducing your volume appropriately during that week. Obviously, we've talked about that a little bit already. We tend to, in our training programming, have the biggest drops come from the long run first. So we'll often pull back the long run by 25 to as much as even 50%, depending on the person and the situation. We'll often pull back the medium long run by 20% or so, and then typically leave the other days pretty much the same in terms of the recovery days or the quality day, with the occasional person pulling back a mile here or there on their recovery days. And so it's a matter of reducing volume primarily through those already long days is where we see those volume reductions come. But if you look at it on a percentage basis, as we said, 15 to 25% reduction is about what we want you to look for on your overall weekly volume during the strength race specific phases. So pretty straightforward. And, what I like people to do is basically, have a vision or idea for what their peak week is going to look like in terms of miles on each of those days. And then from there, construct a down week off of it. Say, okay, well, if I'm in a marathon block and I'm doing 10-mile medium long runs, 8-mile qualities, 20-mile long runs, and a couple of 5-mile recovery days, what is my down week going to look like? Well, maybe go to 12 on my long run, go to 8 on my medium long run, keep my quality at 8, maybe go to 7, pull back 1 there. And then the recovery days might go to 4, but might stay at 5 too on a sort of base down week, but basically have a vision for what it's going to look like, so that when you get there, when you get to those peaks, you're like, all right, this is what my cycle is going to look like. And it's sort of programmed or planned. And then obviously from there, you can go by what you think you need or use your gut to determine if you need to pull back further.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the way I have people plan it.
Yeah. And I'm not going to change any of that, but I figured I might respond with in cases, I guess, exceptions.
Sure.
There are some people, I almost love when I get to kind of build someone from scratch and they've been with me their whole kind of training journey. But it's someone in their earlier phases of doing all of this, a little bit newer runner, sometimes the question is simply like, is that distance recovery? Like, is it honestly, does it feel almost like a treat to you? Right.
Right.
Because even if they're thinking mathematically based on like their peak and everything and what we're ultimately going to target, there are some where I just like their recovery days, I just write 3 miles the whole program because I'm just sort of like, I know that that's a little home-based kind of easy treat. And honestly, if one day you're coming to me and you're like, hey, I'm only doing 3 because you tell me to do 3, but I feel like that could have been 4 or 5. I'm like, that's a good signal. Maybe we start to bump you. Like, I don't mind that coming up organically from the athlete's mouth as opposed to just like predetermining it on the front end.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. And, you know, as you said, I mean, those recovery days, we'll have a whole chapter on an anatomy of the recovery day, but you should feel better when you're done with those days.
Mm-hmm.
And just like you should feel better when you're done with a down week going into the next week. We'll talk about reasons you might not feel chipper during that week, but yeah, you should feel ready to then go tackle the next hard thing. And in this case, it's the next hard week. So reduce your volume and plan what that's going to look like. Again, most of that volume reduction is going to come from the long run and medium long run. And you may or may not see a volume reduction from the other days. But just like anything, you need to play with it a little bit individually and then see what cadence feels right for you or what volume reduction cadence feels right for you. So that's number 2, you're reducing volume. We've covered that pretty thoroughly. Number 3, success factor, which we've already talked about, and I think is maybe number 1 success factor, maybe should be reordered to the top of this list, is you want to maintain your routine, which means not just that you're running on your normal days. So every day you would normally run, you run during a down week to make sure that the body doesn't feel sluggish or out of whack. Plus you just you maintain the reservation for that time spent moving on your calendar. But also it's the other things that you do. If you're doing strength training a couple of times a week, you do strength training during your down week, just like anything else. So you want to, as much as possible, maintain the rhythm of your week, just like you would with an up week, you know, where you're working harder. You just might have a little less time spent on the running itself, the specific running itself. We'll talk about what to do with that extra time here in a second. But it's just so critical that you don't get out of whack with the rhythm of the whole cycle during these down weeks. And you maintain that by just sticking with what usually works for you. But it's not that complicated, I guess.
No, it's not. And I do agree, stick with the routine. I will say, though, there's one caveat that I've always thrown to athletes, and it's honestly, I got it from Jeff Knight, former Team Rogue coach, friend of both of ours. But that's where he did make space that if a day of being skipped is needed, it was permissible or on the table.
Sure.
So it's like, it's not like advocating for a day off per se, but I want to speak to the high achieving minds who literally want to get everything perfect. And even within a down week, in the spirit of getting an A+ and trying to be idealistic and perfect and always doing their best, thinking like, all right, well, that Thursday you had 4 programmed as a recovery, but you're still like, if you haven't been sleeping that well and life's stressful and something's going on and you need an extra day of just a couple more hours of sleep, it's like, I'm not always trying to create exceptions to rules, but I want to point that one out that's on the table.
Give yourself permission.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would argue just go for a walk instead.
Yeah. There you go.
Go for a walk, right? Just keep moving, but just make it super easy movement. Which, by the way, is a good topic to bring up here, which is that during these down weeks, you know, those easy runs, those recovery runs should be glacially slow. They should be pitter-patter-esque, you know, super chill, so that you feel better after each individual one and then at the end of the week. So maintain your routine. I think we've hammered that home enough. Number 4, you're maintaining quality. So we're still doing speed work during down weeks. And, I've had people ask me, well, so does that mean if we do speed work during down weeks, we're somehow pulling back on the speed work? And the answer is yes and no. Yes and no. Typically the volume of our speed work on down weeks is a little bit less. So you're doing less specific fast work, but often we're still doing the higher end speeds. We like to work the faster paces during down weeks in forms that are easily manageable. And so you might see a lot of what would be considered priming workouts during down weeks throughout our cycles, where you're working the really fast into the range, but with plenty of recovery. We love our 200 on, 200 off, for example, as a down week workout, where you're doing 200 on at 5K pace, maybe working down a little bit from there, but with 200 easy jog. So it's, yes, you're hitting those paces, but for a really short interval, and then you get plenty of recovery in between. And so we like to tap those faster paces when the volume is a little bit lower, so that we can stay sharp and fresh and make sure that when it does come to doing those longer grinding workouts, you're still ready to go. So you still do your qualities. And sometimes they're not easy workouts necessarily. We have variety of them, and it depends on obviously what phase of the training you're in, but there's still going to be some speed.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you compared it to like priming workouts. It's like, yeah, I like to lean on 100s or basically straights and curves, just 100 on, 100 off, or the in and out 200s. And what's cool is that, like, while it may not be as taxing at a 5K, 3 miles of 200 at 5K, 200 easy, it's not too dissimilar. Like you're getting proper stress and you're able to work that turnover. And even though we're putting in the recovery 200 so that we don't overcook and don't burn ourselves up, lactate will still kind of pump in there and rise. And like it's the workout, I guess, in the same way that we said in the recovery phase last week, like the workout's still going on when you're cooling down. And your body's still developing even post-race as you're coming out and cooling off. Even in these 200s off, on that example of 200 on, 200 off, you're still getting benefit in there. But we're doing it in like the most low stress. It's like we're trying to work that turnover without truly over-stressing you when we go back to that idea of stress loads. But volume reduction is the main component.
And because you're reducing volume, and we're usually in those workouts getting plenty of recovery, that it allows you to kind of tap on those faster things so that we keep that speed alive, keep those fast twitch muscles firing, and basically prime you going into another up week with a perhaps longer, more grinding style workout. So you're maintaining qualities during your down week always. So that's success factor 4. Success factor 5 is we want you to invest that extra time in recovery. And so, if we were to just use easy math, let's say somebody's running 50-mile weeks, their down week is 40 miles. So they're saving 10 miles in a down week at 25%. Or no, that's 20%, sorry, at 20% of their volume. So 10 miles, and let's say they're running on average 9-minute miles. So 90 minutes. So that's an hour and a half saved from their normal routine of running. And what we want you to do is to take that hour and a half, and maybe not 1-to-1, but take a significant chunk of that 90 minutes and invest it into recovery in some way. And I think that's going to vary depending on what works for you, what you need in the moment. Perhaps from down week to down week, it might be a little bit different. But one thing I like to remind my athletes of is reinvest that time and do it with purpose in recovery in a way that makes you feel good, feel better, feel happy. And so what could that look like? Well, it could look like taking a nap. It could look like spending extra time on a foam roller. It could look like going for a longer walk with your dog or your friend. Could look like making a meal at home with friends and family and with good, healthy, whole foods that are going to nourish your body. Could look like getting a massage, perhaps. And so it can look like a bunch of different things. And I think each individual has to decide, well, what do I need? not just in general, but what do I need in a given week? And then just take some of that time and put it back into feeling better coming out of the down week. And just be intentional about it instead of saying, all right, 90 minutes, I got extra 90 minutes. I'm going to go do something else hard instead.
I'm going to go to Orange Theory this week.
Right. Right. Or go, do a big project around the house or something. So yeah, reinvest that extra time in recovery in some way that, fits your recovery modalities, but just beefs it up a little bit. And I like to remind people, on the weekends, especially, if you're not doing a big long run, if you're not going to run 20 miles in a marathon cycle and instead you're doing 12, then most of that time savings is right there on a Saturday or Sunday, where you can then take that time and 1-for-1 match it with something else that helps make you feel better coming out of the down week.
Even a nap. Just even coming home from that long run shower, you're like, well, typically I'm out there 2 to 3 hours and I'm back early this time. So it's like, go face plant and just,
get a big brunch, with all the macronutrients and, filling meal and then go sleep.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of naps. Some people aren't into them, but I think I've called myself the president of Nap Club at one point or another because yes, to me, and look, most of the time I'm having to go do kid stuff on a Saturday, but if I can go eat brunch and then come home and get a nap, even if it's 30 minutes before the rest of the life happens, then that's a really good Saturday. A really good Saturday long run. So reinvest your extra time in recovery. That's success factor number 5. Last thing is sort of what not to do with that time. So, invest the extra time in recovery, but don't invest it in something brand new. So yeah, maybe you have an extra 90 minutes. This is not the time to go do the new thing or to do the crazy project around the house, as I already mentioned. Invest it in something that's going to aid recovery. And at a minimum, just sit down and relax, right? Versus adding something new to the mix because it's a down week.
This is when you lean into those concepts of like, just be, because we're always driven by like, well, if the world isn't what you want it to be, go change it, go make it happen. That's our driving growth mindset. Like, if you don't like your situation, change it. Down weeks, it's sort of like, just be. I am.
Right. What if you, if you're like, I don't know what to do with myself, I'm done early on my long run. It's like, well, what if you just went outside and left your phone inside and just watched the sunrise or watched the birds play and listen to them. And while it's not necessarily a structured or organized meditation, I think in our world where we're so connected digitally, especially, just having that detox where you're like, all right, I'm just going to sit outside and just be like, so do that instead of feeling the need to like, oh, well, I can go, do this class because I have time to try it. It's like, no. Try nothing new in down weeks.
Yeah. I'll add on, like, as long as they're thinking through the words of like restorative or relax, or recover, that's where you do need to know a little bit about yourself, where it's like, know what works for you that helps you decompress or relax or recover. Cause I was going to use an example of like yoga I've thrown out before. But even that, like if you don't ever do yoga, I'm not saying go start a yoga practice. It's more like those that are experienced with yoga and know how to do it, then yeah, using that like a restorative session, not some like super hot session, but like some kind of restorative
power flow.
Exactly.
Restorative, maybe breath related meditative session. If you're used to doing that, would be a perfect solution. But one thing I like to think about in my own training is planning it a little bit. And, it's hard with kids and families, but if you know that cadence of your down weeks and you can look at those weekends and say, all right, I've got a little lower long run that week. What else do I have going on? And do a little bit of planning to make it a fun thing, to kind of make it something you can look forward to. And again, I think when we think of recovery, we think it has to look a certain way. Like it has to look like being on the ground on a foam roller or something that feels very, running connected, right? But I think it's actually much broader than that. Or at least you can define recovery much broader than that if you think about it holistically. And so, yeah, it's more sleep. Maybe that's an obvious one we've already talked about, but making the home cooked meal with friends where you've got your device put away, you're surrounded by community, you're eating good food that's well prepared, you're having a good feeling meal with friends. Like that's down week activity that is recovery oriented.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you're not going to bed too late or, doing something that's tearing your body up during that window of time with alcohol or whatever. Not that you can't have a glass of wine, but, just that could be a very restorative activity that we don't necessarily connect to recovery in our sort of nerdy world of training, or going for a walk with a friend you haven't seen in a while, or taking out your dog for a walk and going a little longer post long run. That's recovery. Doing a walk, easy movement, which creates blood flow, which promotes healing, and also allows you to connect to an animal or to a person who maybe, you have a bond with, that's helps stabilize the nervous system and kind of put you into that recovery mode. So there's a lot of different ways, going to a movie, and just kind of relaxing and enjoying something that's going to be good for the soul, so there's a lot of different ways that it can manifest, because when we think about movement, sleep, fellowship, good food, what can you do with those ingredients to plan something that is fun and something you can look forward to? That's a way to make down weeks, I think, kind of cool.
Yeah. That was good.
So
you were on a roll there.
Yeah.
There was a little flow state, I think, right there.
So think about it holistically, because it's life. It's not just running, it's life and how it all fits together. But nothing new. All right. So before we wrap this, we wanted to give a little bit of real talk on down weeks, which I think is just something to be aware of, because I think when people think down weeks, they're like, oh, I'm pulling back on volume, doing, maybe a little less lengthy speed workout. It's like, I'm going to feel great, right? I'm going to feel great, right? It's like, no, actually, you aren't necessarily going to feel great. You're going to feel good, hopefully coming out of it into the next week. But oftentimes during the down week itself, just like during a taper phase, you don't necessarily feel great or spry because the body is in that rebuild mode. And so that's one word of warning I always want to give people. It's like down weeks aren't necessarily rainbows and unicorns in terms of how you're going to feel. Like you might actually feel like shit, to put it bluntly, during the down week, because you are recovering from the 2 hard weeks before that. Plus you might be thinking, well, I've got, shorter long run this week. That's going to feel great. It's going to go by so fast. And then sometimes those 12-mile runs can be slogs when you're like, man, the 20-miler flew by, but the 12-miler feels like it's taking forever. Like I've been in that place because I think part of it is just the expectation difference, when you're showing up and you got 20 miles on the calendar, you kind of have your game face on and, it's business time. You're like, all right, I'm going to go crank it out. And you've kind of planned mentally for that, right, all week. But when we think 12, oh, it's just 12, no big deal. And maybe it won't be. I'm not saying it has to be, but sometimes those 12 milers in a down week after you're coming off a 20-mile long run can feel like long and sloggy, right? And so it's just a word of warning to be prepared for that, because it may not feel amazing during the down week, but that's a part of the recovery process. Just like sometimes in a taper, we don't always feel great. But we know that by the time we get to the peak race, or in this case, back to the up weeks, we're going to be ready to go if we've taken our down week appropriately, but we may not feel like it throughout that week.
Yeah. I sometimes go out of my way. I think it is wise to sort of prepare for the worst, but hope for the best kind of. So it is wise to almost go into down weeks, assuming they're bad. Because then when they are, I'll try to whisper to myself, and I try to pass this on to athletes. Oh, this is evidence that I needed a down week, right? So when it's bad, whisper that to yourself when you're not feeling so great. Another thing to consider is I'll try to emphasize like, hey, after 7 days of rest and recovery, you're going to feel better. And then it's like, how many days did I say? 7. Because if you're checking in on day 4, and this is also where I want to tie it back to earlier, you had said, you said some athletes will tell me, I just take a down week when I need it. It's like, well, you might find out in your 3rd or 4th week that on that Thursday, you're finally in a hole. But this whole time you were playing in 20. And not only are you going to go into a psychological frenzy that when you feel bad on a Thursday and you're like, oh gosh, maybe I did need a down week this week, but I've still got 20. Either psychologically you run less and now you're messing with your own head because you're like, I switched it late in the game and I don't know if that's me being a quitter or me what. But also if you go force the 20, which is what most people will do, then that's when they invite injury. But anyway, back to this idea of like, you may not feel good in day 3 or 4 or 5. It's like you got to like almost force in your mind to make it sticky. It's on the other side of 7 days of recovery, or it's for having taken the down week. Now it's realistic to expect to feel good this first up week where we start increasing stress again. It's kind of like watched pot never boils. That's coming to mind because it's sort of like, yeah, just go into the down week. For having taken it, you will feel better, but no one's saying it will feel better in it.
Right. And just set the expectations appropriately. I think that's the big part of it, right? It's if you just know it might be a slog through the down week, but you're going to do your appropriate steps, follow these six success factors, you'll be good on the other side. But if you have the right expectations that it may not feel great, maybe a bit sloggy, then it's going to be fine because you know what to expect, right? Mm-hmm. Versus I think when we think down weeks initially, we're like, oh, it's going to be great. I'm going to feel great. It's so much less volume. But then it doesn't necessarily feel that way. So just be prepared. Mentally, down weeks aren't necessarily the most fun weeks, but you do need them. You need to take your medicine so that you can recover from the up weeks and then get back to the work on the other side. So there you go. As we wrap this episode, a couple of quick reminders on our training. First, I just want to mention, Indianapolis Marathon. That's going to be our rogue destination race of choice. Fast, flat race, Indy. We've been there before. It's an amazing venue. Second weekend in November. Basically, if you want to train for that, want to train with us, you've got all the options from in person in the Austin and Dallas areas to virtually, no matter where you are on the spectrum of kind of new to these distances or high volume, already super experienced at the distances. We've got 3 different groups to match any experience level in our virtual group world. Plus we have our virtual one-on-one and basically any profile of coach that could be good for you to help usher you to your next goal. So go check that out. You can check out our website, roguerunning.com, and you can also just email us, coaching@roguerunning.com, if you want us to kind of help you sort through it. So go check all of that out and then join us on Fridays, 2 p.m. Central for our Q&A on Instagram live at Rogue Running, because that's always a ton of fun. And if you have questions about the episode or about your own training, you can jump on with us there and we'll answer them. And we always have good questions. Mm-hmm. So check that out, 2 p.m. Central on Fridays. All right, guys, that's it. Go get your down weeks done and we'll talk to you next week.